Well, just to give you an overview, I want to introduce you to National Catholic Rural Life, because I think many of you probably have never heard of our organization, even though we're 89 years old. And then I want to talk about the blind spot in our culture. And I'll tell you what that is in a few minutes here. And then a little bit about Catholic social doctrine. We only have 20 minutes, so I'm going to have to be brief in some of my comments. But what I also want to talk about is the food and agriculture challenges that we face and why eating is a moral act. National Catholic Rural Life Conference was founded in 1923. We're almost up to our 90th anniversary coming up here in November. What's interesting is it was founded by a priest named Edwin V. O'Hara, Father Edwin V. O'Hara. He went on to become Archbishop Edwin V. O'Hara, but he grew up on a dairy farm outside Lanesboro, Minnesota, southeast Minnesota. He had a passion for social justice. He had a concern for rural people. And so his heart was there when he became a priest in 1904, and he continued to desire to think through how to reach the rural communities at that time. Half the population in our country were living in rural communities in 1923. And he looked at the rural question because the church's resources were going to the urban areas at that time. Catholic Rural Life today is all about renewing Catholic faith in rural America by bringing the gospel of Christ and the social teachings of his church into the heart of rural life. We're about taking and applying Catholic teaching to the questions that impact rural communities. But this also is very relevant for those of you living in urban areas. First of all, many of us are rural at heart. We may come from rural communities, we may have relatives in rural communities, but also many of the issues in rural communities transcend the rural-urban boundaries. Food is an example. Who doesn't eat here? And if we have no farms, we have no food. So farming, agriculture, and food, they're linked inextricably. And it's an important point because we do need to be concerned about these questions in rural life that are often out of sight and out of mind. But we all take them for granted in regards to our food, water, etc. Just a brief introduction on Catholic Rural Life's personnel. Bishop Paul Aitchen is our president of the board of directors. We have a national board of directors made up of bishops, men and women religious, priests, lay experts from different fields, and I have a staff. We are based in Des Moines. Our headquarters in Des Moines. I have a satellite office at the University of St. Thomas and St. Paul, and I have our policy coordinator, Bob Gronsky, is in St. Louis, and he covers national issues. So we try to spread out as much as we can. We have members in 46 states. We have support from over 106 dioceses in the country. 96 dioceses have rural in their oversight of the over 185 dioceses that we have in the country. And this chart is just showing you the variety of dioceses in our country. So our members are from 46 states, and we have 2,200 leaders who we interact with on a weekly basis, sending them updates, etc. Now, our organization has 3 major program areas. We have a rural ministry and outreach, which I'll talk a little bit more on, it addresses the need for leadership in rural communities and development of lay leadership, as well as we provide a rural ministry practicum to priests around the concerns in rural life. Agriculture and food, which we're going to focus on today, and we have several different programs related to the ag and food area. And then finally, the environmental stewardship question, especially where environmental stewardship and agriculture intersect. The rural outreach and ministry work that we do involves both teaching at seminaries and providing training for future priests about the issues in rural communities. And so we have a program with the St. Paul Seminary School of Divinity, and we also speak at other seminaries around the country. We take students, theology students, seminarians, out to rural communities, interacting with farmers, and to see some of the issues and concerns. Many of them will have rural parishes when they graduate, and eventually they may be a pastor in a small rural community. We also do lay leadership development. What's happening in rural communities is Priests are covering 4 or 5 parishes at a time. And so here we try to equip rural leaders, lay leaders, and we are doing a pilot right now in 2 dioceses and expanding to 3 this next year. Our rural ministry and outreach also involves celebrating rural life, and we do that in many dioceses across the country, where we speak, we participate, and celebrate the charism and uniqueness of those living in rural communities. We also advocate for the ag and food issues, so we educate our members about what's happening at the federal level. So for instance, yesterday in the House of Representatives in Congress, they voted no on the Farm Bill in the House of Representatives. The Farm Bill is a $500 billion 5-year bill. Over 70% of that $500 billion goes to food stamps, the supplemental nutrition program that assists those who are either on welfare or in need of help. And so as a result, the program expires in September. There's a likelihood that it will be extended a second time, but this is a very controversial issue in Congress right now. We try to educate our members about some of the concerns and how to speak to their representatives. From a Catholic perspective, being concerned for the poor, being concerned also for the other aspects of the Farm Bill, which cover both crop insurance and support for farmers and rural development. It's a complex subject, and we don't have time to go into it today, but it's important. And we speak around the country doing educational workshops, speaking on behalf of rural to apply the church's teachings to these rural communities. And we do it in a variety of ways. We do it at these celebrations, we do it through commentaries and blogs, we do it through a number of things. We also participate in national meetings with social ministry directors, etc. And then we have a magazine that we publish to get out the word to everyone. And we do this through our website. And I'm going through this quickly. I just want to give you a sense of the education advocacy work that we do. I want to get into the blind spot. And there are 3 different situations that occurred over the last couple of years that I now write and speak often about this blind spot. The esteemed National Catholic Bioethics Quarterly is an esteemed journal. And in 2011, in the fall of 2011, writer Kevin Murphy questioned why Christians should be involved in the food movement and some of the motives, and he even questioned NCRLC's role as in the food movement, and thinks that these Christian organizations, Catholic organizations, are being used by what he termed a liberal left agenda. And I co-wrote with Christopher Dodson an article refuting Kevin Murphy's claims that was published in the summer of 2012. But again, the writer made many claims of questioning why Catholics, Christians should be involved in some of these questions regarding the food movement and the environmental concerns that are tied to this. Another example was I was teaching the rural ministry practicum in St. Paul's Seminary School of Divinity, and the students, we were talking about the questions of food and agriculture, and a couple of the students started shaking their heads and going, why are we talking about these issues? You know, we're going to be future priests, we should be focused on the sacraments and rural communities. But we wanted to also raise the awareness of the context in which those priests are going to be working in those rural dioceses, in those rural parishes. Often agriculture and food questions are very significant in some of these communities. And it also betrayed, I would say, a blind spot that what does the church really have to say about food and agriculture? They have no expertise in this area. They have no expertise in agricultural production. And over a course of a week, a majority of these seminary students begin to move and to see a greater and greater understanding of why we incorporate food and agriculture issues into this rural ministry practicum. And what it has to do with is our Catholic social doctrine. The church has a rich, rich history of letters to the church to address modern problems. These issues that from Rerum Novarum in 1891 to Caritas in Veritate in 2009, our Holy Fathers have been moved to address particular issues of the day that are of concern, whether it's around labor, it's around the questions around unbridled capitalism, or questions around the environment, etc. And the Catholic social doctrine is so important that we often I have in my work, others from other faiths coming to our website, calling on us, coming to our workshops to get encouragement and support for a theology of that environment, if you will, to get a deeper theology of these social justice concerns. Well, this last spring, I tapped 3 maple trees in our yard for the first time. I got 30 gallons of sap. Do you know how much maple syrup that produced? Any guesses? 3 quarts. So I boiled it down and boiled it down and boiled it down. Well, the church has done a similar thing. They boiled it down to some key principles of Catholic social doctrine. Now, the compendium of the Catholic Church is a beautiful document. But what the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and others have done for us is really boil it down to 7 key principles. And these are the 7. Protecting human life and dignity. Responsibility and participation in our community, both as a family, individual family, as a nation, and internationally. An option for the poor and vulnerable, being always concerned about the poor and vulnerable in our communities, in our state, our country, and around the world. The dignity of work and workers' rights, and how important that is, and so giving employees a fair wage. The solidarity and subsidiarity principles. Again, solidarity with others around the world who are suffering, with those who are in need, but also subsidiarity is also respecting authority and respecting the different governmental bodies, whether it be county, city, state, etc. And the respect for creation. The respect for creation, that we recognize a creator and we live in a created order. Now, these are really deep principles that come out of many of those documents I showed you in this prior slide, boiled down to 7, or I've got 6 principles here. Sometimes it's 7. I combined the 2 here. But the point here I'm making is that these principles, when applied to food agriculture issues, every one of these issues have come up in the past 30 years, and I want to just highlight a few things. Pope John Paul II came to Des Moines, Iowa, and he came to speak to rural America, to the farmers. It was his first trip to the United States, and a farmer hand-wrote a letter to invite him to come to Des Moines to speak to rural America. He was going to Boston, New York, Chicago. He added Des Moines to that itinerary. And he spoke very eloquently about the importance that farmers play, and that the church affirms the farmers. Their vocation is unique. And he gave three attitudes: the gratitude that what God has given us, being thankful, conservation, conserving the land, water, natural resources for future generations, and generosity, always being generous and concerned for those who don't have food. The U.S. Catholic bishops, the U.S. Catholic Conference of Catholic Bishops, put together a reflection on food, farmers, and farm workers in 2003 and published it. in early 2004. But they made the argument in this wonderful document that food is unique. It sustains life itself, and that's why it's different from any other. It's not a commodity that we can just exchange and trade, although it has become a commodity in our economic models. Providing food for all is a gospel imperative. We need to be concerned for the poor. Again, this is coming out of the social doctrine of the church. For most Catholics and our whole nation, food is we get it from the grocery store. How it's grown, that's really a distant reality. Very few people. You know what percent of people actually farm in this country? Any guesses? 3%? 2%. So you wonder why. It is a concern. But this disconnection results in putting a trust in a food system that provides food for us. We're putting trust in a much more concentrated number of individuals, fewer individuals making decisions for millions of people of where food goes. And this is across the world, not just in the United States. And there are important ethical questions for us to consider. And these are the ethical questions that you as editors, as reporters, these questions: how can hunger in the human family be overcome? I was in Stockton presenting at this symposium a couple years back, and this is again the San Joaquin Valley, one of the richest areas in the world from an agricultural standpoint. But they have very high levels of poverty, very high levels of people on food stamps or needing food stamps, and there's a real disconnect. You've got major industrial agriculture in that valley, but you also have many who are impoverished. And the questions there, how can we ensure a safe, affordable, and sustainable food supply? And UC Davis just came out with a study on the amount of nitrites in the water that have percolated down through the soil into the groundwater. And it's at levels that are so high that it puts infants in danger in certain areas, and it happens to be in rural areas. You've got millions of people drawing upon this groundwater. And there's a concern because the infrastructure in rural communities, or some of these poorer rural communities, don't have the systems in place to filter out the nitrates and nitrites. So these are the ethical questions of the day. And how can food, water, and other elements of God's creation be preserved, protected, and used well in the service of the common good? These are moral questions. This is why the church is concerned. The church should be engaged. And the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops charges us to be engaged. This reflection is for all of us it's a call to responsibility. And Pope Benedict, when he was Pope, he also said, he made a comment, this was at an Angelus in November 14th of 2010. He said, I believe that this is the moment for the reevaluation of agriculture, not in a nostalgic sense, but as an indispensable resource for the future. He said, we need to look at it again. It needs to be on our minds. Not only, this is right in the middle of the food crisis and the economic crisis that was occurring in 2009, 2010. What was happening here were there were high commodity prices. Some of the developing countries couldn't afford to bring in, import some of these high-cost foods at that time. And it was really challenging some of these impoverished nations. And at the same time, there were other countries, developing countries, that had an overabundance of food. And so he was looking at this question and saying, we need to reevaluate this. And then in his encyclical letter, Caritas in Veritate, he makes several points. And his points here are just the economy needs ethics in order to function properly. Not any ethics whatsoever, but an ethics which is people-centered. So we have Pope John Paul II, we have the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, we have our Pope Benedict. So what's happened? What's going on in rural United States, especially in regards to food? Well, there's about 52 million people still living in rural communities.
That's about now 17% of the population, not 50% since back in the 1920s when our organization was founded. The average age of farmers has increased to 58 years old. Farming has become much more industrialized. Farmers have become larger with fewer farmers. In 1960, we had 4 million farmers, over 4 million farmers. In 2011, how many farms do you think we have now? Any guesses? Half that amount, 2.2 million farms. Absentee ownership has increased dramatically, which means someone owns a farm, but they live in Florida or they live somewhere else, and someone else is managing that farm. They're not connected to their communities any longer. And Mike will get into some of these reasons. Rural communities have lost population as a result. The more concentrated a farm is, fewer families managing the farm, fewer people in that community. And as a result, rural communities have lost population. And young people aren't coming back because there aren't as many jobs now. Now, I'm painting a pretty dark picture, and this is true in many communities across the country. And farmers are more dependent now on government subsidies. Now, conventional agriculture goes, but that's great news. We're becoming more efficient, more productive. Isn't that great news? But there are some concerns. And again, new technologies, GPS, computer education, and biotechnologies have led to incredible increase in yields and productivity. But there are some concerns that, the higher mechanization, so now you've got planters that can plant 32 rows instead of 8 rows. And just imagine, these are immense machines. Increased chemical reliance on pesticides. Increased fertilizer reliance and synthetic fertilizers. That's why that UC Davis study was such important, because it was highlighting the danger of overuse of too much fertilizers and the impact on water. And specialization, which means instead of having a diversified farm operation, you focus on one crop, or maybe a 2-crop rotation, corn and soybeans. If you're doing row crops, it leads to a lot of problems. We have fewer farms, we have larger farms, but we have a lot of topsoil depletion, especially in the Midwest. Groundwater contamination, surface water contamination. We have a decline in family farms in these rural communities. And we have an increase in pollution. Just some environmental concerns, 11 billion annually on 5 billion pounds of active ingredients. 77% of that is for use in agriculture. So the amount of pounds of pesticide being used is very significant. And the EPA estimates agriculture is responsible for 70% of the surface water pollution. In the Gulf of Mexico, we now have a hypoxic zone. That's because because of all the fertilizer, nitrogen being in the surface water going into the Mississippi River, going into the Gulf of Mexico. That fertilizer then causes plants to grow in the water, and it draws all the oxygen. So there's no living creatures left in that particular area. But this shows you the nitrogen loss from land and streams, very significant in the Midwest. Just a couple of other points. This is in Iowa. The Raccoon River has the highest average nitrate concentration of any of the 42 largest tributaries in the Mississippi River Basin. So this shows just the high level of nitrate and nitrogen. And this is very, very concerning, especially to young babies. When you have that high level of nitrates in your water. And as a result, Iowa has the largest nitrate removal system in the world. Now there's some social justice concerns too, around farm workers, food workers, those related to the agricultural industry. And these are just a few of the concerns. So we look at our Catholic social doctrine and we go, there are some real concerns here, but this is out of sight and out of mind. And therefore, we need to look at this and to continue to keep an eye on some of these areas. Now there are areas of hope. I work with many professors around the country, and Dr. Matt Liebman, professor of agronomy at Iowa State University, showed me a study. And this is just to give you an example. This is called a sediment export. So how much dirt is going into the surface waters how much dirt is being eroded into surface waters. By placing a 10% of a watershed into perennial cover crops, by putting cover crops in between the rows, it reduces erosion by 95%. If you put it, and again, it shows you 2 years, 2008, 2009. Down below are the, shows you the percent. Those are the perennial crops. You see the erosion is reduced very significantly. It can be done to reduce erosion. Professor Matt Lehman, he said, adding perennial forage crops reduces reliance on agrochemicals, fossil fuels, while maintaining or improving productivity, environmental quality, and profitability. It can be done. And there's another family called the Roseman family farm. They work on a farm, family farm in Harlan, Iowa. This is the western part of Iowa. They have 700 acres. It's not a tiny farm, but they happen to use organic practices. But their point was that when they wanted to move to a chemical-free farming practices, that they said, oh no, people were saying, no, your organic farming is a return to the old-fashioned way. You can't do that. Your yields are going to be poor. You can't do a fair share of the feeding the world. You're going to have weed and insects, and you're going to have all kinds of problems, and your cost of production is going to be higher because it's just going to be too difficult. Well, what Ron and his family showed is that now they look at their farm as a dynamic whole farm system. They have 6 different crops they rotate throughout their area so that the pests don't gain a resistance. They continue to rotate their crops. They have 100 hogs that they raise, and they use the manure to spread as fertilizer. So they're not purchasing inputs. So their costs are going down in terms of their management. They're using inputs are reduced, and that income is significantly higher. They manage their weeds and pests. They work closely with Iowa State University on a way of how to do this, so that they have scientists and they have crops, cover crops, reducing the erosion, etc., and putting nitrogen back in the soil. So this is just showing you that it can be done. And this is just one example. But I wanted to highlight here, food and agriculture are inextricably linked. And the increasing concentration at every level of agriculture and the growing globalization mean that fewer people are making decisions that affect far more people than any other time in history. And this is a quote from the compendium of the social doctrine of the Catholic Church. Because of the corrupting influence of injustice, that is, of sin, the church cannot remain indifferent to these social matters. The church has to be involved, at least has to have a voice. For instance, the Farm Bill, which was being discussed and debated, there are many different amendments and things added into that legislation that support what we would call practices that could help support conservation or help support family farms or research around sustainable agriculture. These are things that the church has spoken out for, or also to continue to protect those who are vulnerable. So I'll end here, but this is, again, my point here is that this is a quote from Pope Benedict: to desire the common good and strive towards it is a requirement of justice and charity. Every Christian is called to practice this charity in a manner corresponding to his or her vocation and according to the degree of influence he or she wields in the polis. You all have influence. You all have a significant role, and you choose, what to highlight, what to write about, and you can play a significant role in this as well. And we'll have some more questions. I'll let Mike now speak. But my last point is food and agriculture are so important to life. And if our faith isn't relevant to these issues, then arguably our faith and our message becomes irrelevant. If we aren't applying these truths in the public square, I argue that often then we become irrelevant as Catholics and Christians because we're not addressing some of these issues that affect the common good. Thank you.